Game over, man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger potion.
So simple.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 625 for February 23rd, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us this week, everybody. Brendan, 16 million. Do you know the significance of that number?
I'm guessing it's NHL related.
It is NHL related. 16 million is the amount of people that tuned in to watch the championship gold medal. I'm not even sure how they are classifying it, but
Test market.
the final game between the United States and Canada and the final of the Four Nations tournament, which is the biggest non-Olympic hockey game ever in the United States anyway.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Yes, it is pretty incredible. I mean, that number for context would rival like big time college football games.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So-
And wasn't that like double what the previous USA and Canada
Yes.
game was?
Yep. Doubled what the first one was. And I was on the show last week raving about the remarkable ratings for the first time they matched up.
Well,
And yeah, it doubled.
yeah. So I guess unlike Brave New World, it's not a percentage drop we're talking about here. It's actually an increase.
An increase. Yes,
Yeah.
it doubled in revenue, if you will. At least in terms of the eyeballs. It was quite an incredible game. Honestly, it
Yeah.
was one of the best hockey games that you could have asked for in that moment. And even though the United States lost in overtime, and honestly, given the political climate, I'm not too heartbroken about it, if I'm being honest. But as I was rooting for the USA players, politics aside,
Yeah.
it was obviously a deflating loss, but it was still an electrifying night given the stakes of the sport and having that many eyeballs. And once again, you're having talking heads from all other sports talking about hockey. ESPN did nothing but talk about that game all day long.
Yeah.
It was incredible. I've never seen anything like it. At least not since probably the late 90s when the sport was at its peak before things started to kind of derail themselves a little bit. But
Sure.
man, live. I talked the last time how I turned into a kid again.
Oh, that's what you
during-
texted me. Yeah, you texted me. You basically de-aged like Benjamin Button during that game.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I guess Brendan's stealing my punchline there a little bit because I talked last time out about how I had turned into a 12-year-old.
I have a habit of doing that, don't I?
Yes. You gotta let me
we
build
joke
these
about us
things
having
up,
the
man.
we joke about having the same brain all the time. That doesn't
I
just
know.
come to movie opinions. That comes to me stealing your thunder when it comes to whatever puns or stories you want to tell.
Exactly. But yes, I did text Brendan that during the game. I mean, the whole pregame recontextualizing of the film Miracle, like the big Miracle speech that you get there from Kurt Russell, they kind of recontextualized it and spliced it with today's players. And I tell you what, I was ready to walk through a brick wall. Like I was ready to go. I was hyped up. Again,
So basically, what you're saying now is Miracle's the greatest movie ever made now.
Maybe. I wish that I could have bottled up how I was feeling leading into that game and really throughout
Sure.
the game because it was so electric. And as much as I love Michigan football, I don't know if anything had moved me the way that tournament did.
Gotcha.
And I think it's because, the difference is, and obviously I love football. I love Michigan football. However, football is a popular sport and everyone watches it. Hockey is not, that's not the case.
Right.
It's a sport that I love it's part of my DNA. And I've always championed I think it's a sport that everyone would love if they would actually give it like a genuine try. And especially if you go to see the games in person. I mean, the skill and the speed of today's players, it is truly unmatched. It is quite remarkable how fast the game is and how skilled they are. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, imagine these guys skating at 20 miles an hour, shooting pucks at 90 miles an hour, and they're taking their sticks and knocking those pucks out of the air. Like it's like the skill is just insane. Like the players of 30 years ago really couldn't do what they're doing today. And if the NHL could ever figure out how to market the sport, and to this point they have struggled drastically, which is why people haven't cared all that much. This hopefully changes things at least a little bit.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Does.
I agree with that. I think you make a good point, though, that just given the nature of the sport and how it's been evolving over the past few years, if you're not too familiar with the sport itself, it could be a real chore to understand what's going on, given how quick-witted that it is, right? It's a very different sport. It's a very different ball game, no pun intended. It's basically like if you were to imagine, like if you're someone that's used to watching soccer, for instance, you're going to have a hard time adjusting to hockey because that's like on fast forward by 20 million percent. It's a very different game.
Yeah, and the skating of it all is also the big difference. And there's no other sport where this is applicable. Whether you're talking about soccer, although soccer, you certainly have to be in significant shape. And like the longevity, the endurance, the distance of soccer is certainly, quite prominent. But when you look at other sports, whether it be football, basketball, baseball, soccer, there's no other sport where you have elite skill to perform that sport. And then there's an extra element of, you have to be the best runner to play in Major League Baseball. You have to be an elite runner to play in the NFL. That's simply not the case. Yeah. Simply not the case. Now, for certain positions, sure. If you're a running back, having great vision
kind
and
of
elite
need that.
feet, kind of need it. Absolutely. But quarterback, linemen, linebackers even, you don't have to be an elite runner to play at a high level, depending on the position.
Right.
With the NHL, elite skating is the bare minimum. You have to be one of the world's best skaters. That is the entry point. If you cannot skate, you cannot play, no matter how skilled you are.
I mean, position is kind of a moot point when it comes to hockey, right? It's not like I made the comparison to soccer to differentiate the sports between each other, but soccer is a very layered positional game where some positions run more than others. Whereas hockey, every position, whether you're offense or defense, you're skating your ass off. I mean, that is essentially the game.
You have to be an elite skater. Now, if by NHL standards, there are layers to that. Some are not the best skaters. Some are average skaters. Some are, Connor McDavid, who is one of the best and fastest skaters in the world. But even at the low end of that spectrum, broadly speaking, that is elite. Elite skating is the entry point to get into the NHL. So yes, in terms of having skilled hands, elite hand-eye coordination, the physicality that comes with hockey, and that was quite prominent in this Four Nations tournament as well. Like, in order to just play the game, you have to have all those abilities. And on top of that, you have to be in the top 1% in terms of skating ability. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy. I mean, imagine telling NFL players to take their skills as great as they are on the football field and say, go do that on ice skates. Good luck. Not sure how many people will be able to translate.
Well, I think people would die.
Maybe that's the case. But that's what makes hockey so special and unique. Because sure, if you put them on pavement or on grass, they'd probably be able to still play a similar game at a high level. But yeah, you do it on skates, and it's a completely different thing.
It is, absolutely.
At any rate, that's my spiel. I hope people go in and give the sport a chance if they're not already. I think you will love it.
Oh,
And
I love in session sports. I really do.
I was very, very excited. 16 million people tuning in for that game. Just
That's incredible. That's incredible.
Absolutely incredible. All right. At any rate, this week's show is going to be a lot of fun. We have a few topics here that I'm very, very eager to get into. We, as we announced last week, are beginning the next phase of our Best Picture movie series. We started this last year. We went through the 1940s. And because there are 25 Best Picture winners, I'm not even sure how long it's been. It's been around a while. Okay?
Yeah, some of those decades we won't bother doing because we've actually reviewed them on the show, given the topicality of some of them. But I mean, some of these past decades, there's still a lot. There's still a lot, even if we lead up to the 2000s, right?
Yes, exactly. So, this is something we've wanted to do for a while, and we thought it would be more fun to jump around than starting from the beginning and kind of going in chronological order.
Yeah.
So we skipped the end of the 1920s.
Yeah.
Because I believe the first year was 1927, 1928, somewhere around
Late
there.
20s. What was the movie? Wings or something like that?
Yes, I believe that is the case.
I got to fact check myself on that one.
Yeah, no, I'm fairly certain that is the case for
Okay.
1927, 28. So we decided to skip the early years, although I do think there are a few in the 1930s that would be fascinating to go through. And we will eventually get there, but we thought it would be more fun to just kind of do this out of order. And because there's so many, we're doing it by decades. So last year we did the 1940s. We have now jumped to the 1960s. So on this week's show, we are going to be continuing that series by talking about Billy Wilder's The Apartment.
Yeah, looking forward to this one.
Very much looking forward to getting into that. Yep.
That's not to say we won't ever go back to the 1950s. We may do the 50s at some point. I mean, there are some good films there that won Best Picture that are worth noting. But we were taking a look at these and we thought, man, the 60s is stacked. Let's do a hook, line, and sinker with this and talk about some really influential films.
Yeah, no, that was really the difference. I mean, I want to eventually get to all of these decades, but
sure,
the 60s very much jumps out when you look at that group of 10.
Yeah,
man, there are some phenomenal films there. This is going to
really
be, I think, a little bit more of a consistent decade than the 40s. The 40s was certainly a time capsule decade, given everything that transpired during the 1940s, historically speaking.
World War II, every movie was in some type of response to that.
100%. And look, that makes sense. Totally get it.
Oh, yeah. And some of them
much of the time is a reflection of the time.
And some of those films, in fact, most of them were a very compelling reflection of those times, such as Casablanca, probably one of the best reflections of World War II ever put to film, right?
Yes, absolutely. An all-timer. Absolutely an all-timer. And I loved having that conversation last year. But yes, we wanted to jump to the 1960s. There's going to be some really, really great films that we get into. And I very much look forward to getting into The Apartment. We'll get to that here in the back half of the episode. Before we begin with our first segment here, I also want to note that we are recording this before SAG is announced. So we have no idea. The only thing that we can do is say, oh my God, can you believe? Edit in later, whatever it is. And then we'll respond by going, oh my goodness, what a win.
What a win.
Loved it. It was so good, right? What a surprise.
It was so great. It was so great. Just this is the magic of editing, right? We're going to edit this show to match what actually happened, right?
Yeah, exactly. Can't believe one. Unreal. Totally unreal.
I will give there are some good nominees this year. Definitely some that we would have loved to see recognized at the Oscars. So we'll see how the actual outcome is when we actually, comment on this maybe in a week's time or something.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and here's the thing, right? I don't know if we'll have time to comment on it actually, because next weekend
Is the Oscars.
is the big show.
Yeah. Well,
so the next time you hear us outside of the reviews, we'll have a couple of reviews later on this week, but the next time you'll hear from Brendan and I will likely be post Oscars, and that will be obviously much of the conversation on next week.
We'll see how SAG goes, because if it ends up producing a lot of interesting points to talk about, maybe it could be ripe for some bonus content. We'll see. We're not going to make any promises about that, but we'll at least educate that potential option.
Yeah, that is certainly possible. And regardless, even if Brendan and I don't get to it, Shadon will have something for Chasing the Gold. So
and when it comes to awards talk, we actually would prefer you listening to her show as opposed to us. She definitely has more of that knowledgeable in. Yeah, she's really great at it.
Yeah, so you can go check out Chasing the Gold. They're going to have an episode later this week where I'm sure they'll comment on the SAG winners, and they're going to be doing their Oscar predictions this week as well. So it's going to be a big episode of Chasing the Gold this week. Everything has been leading to this. Oscar predictions, final Oscar predictions, that is going to be coming out for this week's Chasing the Gold. So certainly be on the lookout for that. However, if Brendan and I do get to some bonus content, as always, if you want to become an In Session Film VIP, you can sign up at patreon.com/InSessionFilm, become a member of the YouTube channel, youtube.com/InSessionFilm, or on Apple Podcasts, you can sign up for an Apple Podcast subscription where that VIP content will arrive that way. So either way, all of our VIP content will go through those different avenues.
Yep.
And your support is very much appreciated.
Absolutely.
Okay, before we get to the apartment here in the back half of the episode, let's first talk about James Bond.
Oh, he died.
He died. He died a glorious death.
And we're not talking about No Time to Die.
Although those images, that film in hindsight, quite appropriate. Quite
predictive, I guess you can say.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So what we're really referring to, as you all know, there was news later on this, or earlier in the week, that Amazon is going to be taking the creative control of the series. And that is disheartening for a lot of reasons, but primarily what it means is that the franchise is going to become much more diluted. There's going to be a lot of spin-off movies, TV series for Amazon, and God knows what else that we'll see. And it's going to become content. It's no longer going to be about creating good movies and having compelling stories. It's going to be about running the content machine, because that's what Bezos is all about. So the fact that Amazon has taken that creative control, and that's why it's appropriate to say R.I.P. James Bond. I mean, because that franchise, as we know it, is now dead.
Well,
it is wholly dead.
Yeah. And now we also have to be clear. A lot of this is also speculative as far as what could end up happening, but this is also Amazon
is it, though?
that we're talking. Well, let me get to that. Because I think the general thing that's happened here, and I'm going to try to be a little bit optimistic where I can, even though it's really hard to do so right now. I think given the events of No Time to Die, some shakeup like this was bound to happen. Okay, I think the franchise needs some kind of change of pace to differentiate itself from how this arc essentially concluded with No Time to Die. Because how do you at this point now, you can't just cast a new actor and make new James Bond films, even though I would love for them to do that. Something new had to happen. I just wish it wasn't this. And I think really the problem I have with it is not so much the creative control shifting. I mean, the Broccoli's have been so heavily tied to this franchise as a family business since the 1960s, right? And it's a shame to see them go. If their heart's not in it anymore, then I don't want to see them constantly force themselves to work on this franchise. I don't mind necessarily passing the torch to a new creative force. I just wish it wasn't Amazon. And I think that's really the big problem I have here. There's even a history of Barbara Broccoli specifically talking about Amazon and the contention that they have with them, the disagreements they have about how the series is meant to be operated. And I think most of it was directed at who's the head of Amazon Studios right now? Jennifer Salk, I believe her name is. I believe that there are reports of Barbara Broccoli even calling her an effing idiot based on how they feel about the James Bond franchise, which is why we're so speculative about what Amazon is going to do. And we're afraid. We are afraid. Something that made James Bond so, I guess, exciting was that it's one of the few movie franchises left that doesn't feel like content. Like whether you like the movies or not, each movie felt like an event. They came out every few years. There was a lot of built up and anticipation around them. They felt like world events in a way. And what we don't want to see is the oversaturation of it. And that's why we're so worried about the Amazon component here taking control. That's really the big thing that I'm worried about more than anything else.
No, I completely agree. And I don't know if they've said explicitly why they're taking a step back. I don't know if it's because their heart isn't in it anymore. But given other reports, if there's any seed of truth to that, I think it's quite easy to infer here that their ambition for this franchise, I don't think any of that is really diminished. I think it's fighting with Amazon that's become exhausting.
It probably is, yeah. And I don't disagree with that potential theory there.
Yeah, I think that's really what this has come down to. And maybe they just got to a point where they decided they've had enough.
They're waving the white flag.
They're waving the white flag. And look, knowing Amazon's business practices, generally speaking, let alone in the film industry, generally, they are bullies. They're very much bullies. And it doesn't take that long of a Google search to come to that conclusion. When you look what they fight up against from a business perspective, they're going to bully their way to what they want, and they probably did that with the Broccolis here. That's most likely what happened.
That's most likely. Yeah, surprised. You're probably right. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either.
So they decided, you know what? Fine, whatever. You guys take control of it. Do with it what you will. Our legacy speaks for itself.
Yeah, they can remain co-owners, and whatever money these new forms of content bring in, they can at least see some of that. But this way, the fans will know that the Broccolis had no creative voice in where this goes. Yeah,
exactly. They can just reap whatever financial benefit that comes without having to take on any responsibility as far as the quality of these new films and series goes, which I think is smart. Separate yourself. Take the money, go on a vacation.
Whoa, take
leave
the
it to
money
Amazon.
And run.
Like, I mean, I guess I can't blame them for that. If Amazon is going to bully their way into having creative control here so they can really just oversaturate this, which is what they're going to do. And the fact that Bezos comes out immediately and was like, who do you guys want as James Bond?
That's a scary thought.
Turn off.
Are we? I don't know if we're actually going to crowdsource the new James Bond, but I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up being the goal or the agenda here. I at least have some form of optimism that perhaps they're not going to go that route, especially given how, for lack of a better term, how much of a Zack Snyder fan base there is. It's going to flood that comment section with Henry Cavill recommendations. It's going to skew and falsify those results in many ways.
Yeah. I think what I have an issue with as far as Bezos coming out and posing that to the public, because you're right. I don't think there's any real possibility they're going to crowdsource who the next James Bond is going to be.
Right.
I think they already know internally who they want, or they have a short list, and they're simply trying to create engagement. What I have an issue with, as far as Bezos coming out like that, is that it's his victory lap.
Oh,
That's what that is.
It feels very like chip on the shoulder, kind of like look what we did kind of voice. It feels like that.
Exactly. Which, you know who would do that? You know who would take a victory lap in that kind of circumstance?
Oh, don't
a
say
Bond
it.
villain.
Yeah.
A Bond villain would
Don't
do
say
that.
it. Where's his mustache? I don't think he has one yet.
I think it is all right there. I'm not even kidding. He should just cast himself as the next Bond villain.
Make it a documentary about this process.
Look, he has the look down. He has the attitude. He's a bully. He is the perfect Bond villain in real life.
You know what I would love to see?
If not him, Elon Musk. Or maybe both of them. Hire both of them.
Let's get a meta version of this movie made. I don't know who would be the right person to do that. But let's have Jeff Bezos be the villain and have the new MI6 be the Broccoli's recruiting every potential actor who's auditioning to be the new James Bond, all coming together to form the new MI6 against Jeff Bezos. Yeah. And the villainous plan, if you will, is the content creation of the Bond franchise.
Yeah. You know what they're
movie.
Yeah. Okay, so you're very much spurring on some creativity here in my mind, because here's what's going to happen. This is going to be your next James Bond movie. You ready for this? And the answer is no, you're not ready for this.
No, I don't want it.
This is what's going to happen. They're going to have Bezos in the role as the Bond villain. And then they're going to bring back Daniel Craig. And he's going to begin the movie by finding a time machine. And he's going to go back to the 90s, and he's going to come across Pierce Brosnan. And the two of them will combine and join forces. They will go back in time and get Timothy Dalton. Then they will find Roger Moore, and then George Lazenby and Sean Connery.
And of course, those who are no longer living will be deep faked into the movie.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what I was going to get to. The ones not living with us will 1,000% be AI generated, 100%. And they're going to form the Bond Avengers to fight Bezos in the next movie. That's exactly what's going to happen here. And yeah, they're going to use as much AI as possible, so that way the movie cost about $7 million, even though it should be like $500 million.
It'll most likely not be a movie. It'll most likely be a series or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, series on Amazon. But that's what's going to happen. Get ready for it, because that's exactly what Bezos is about to do.
Well, I want to talk about Amazon again for a second, because I'm not trying to give them benefit of the doubt, but Amazon has created compelling content before, well-reviewed content, well-liked content before. You know, Fallout, I haven't watched, but I hear great things about. Same with The Boys. I know there are some defenders of the Rings of Power, the Lord of the Rings show. And of course, Amazon.
I did hear season 2 was great. I admittedly have not seen it yet. I only saw the first season, and I was mixed on it. So
yeah, I hear it has gotten better. But we know that Amazon, from a creative standpoint, is capable of good, thrilling, whether it be movies or shows. We know they're capable of that. The issue is, I just don't want to see that same type of creation for the Bond franchise, because we talked about this already. There's something really interesting about the Bond franchise being kind of this small niche thing that we don't get all that often. And I like that it's one of the few remaining franchises that still has that kind of niche edge. Maybe the only other one being the Mission Impossible franchise, but that's theoretically ending this summer, so we don't know what's going to happen with that. But with James Bond, I kind of want that preservation to still be there. It feels very worldly, almost European, very distant, otherworldly in a way, and it doesn't follow the same rules. Not every franchise needs to be content creation, and that's the thing that scares me. In a way, like, if a series is made within the James Bond universe and it's great, I don't care that it's great. Call me cynical. That's not the type of content I want with James Bond. I want it to be sporadic, and that's what scares me.
No, I completely agree. I have absolutely no optimism for any of this. And I hate to sit here and completely
Yeah.
go down this rabbit hole where we're joking and making fun of all of this, and it's hard to take any of it seriously because I don't see any hope in this. I don't. I think this is going to turn out quite miserable for everybody involved. And that's because I don't have any faith in Bezos. They may hire great directors. Whoever the next James Bond is may come into the role and absolutely slay it. I mean, who's to say?
Well,
But
like I said, again, this is probably one of the more cynical things I've ever said on this show. I don't really get this cynical all that often, but if, hypothetically speaking, Amazon creates a series around James Bond and it's as good as something like The Penguin, for instance, right? I'm still going to hate it because that's what I don't want to see with James Bond. I don't want to see a series. I don't want to see that type of content. If it's the best thing on earth, I'm still going to dislike it. Like, call me cynical. That is the wrong approach for this franchise.
I agree. Yeah, and I'm not sure if there's a world where I will fully come on board. I mean, if they maintain that aura for the films and the spin-off series is maybe more like The Penguin, then maybe I can get behind on that. Mostly because I don't put as much stock into the TV side of it. For example,
Unless it's Marvel.
If The Penguin was terrible, doesn't change how I view the Batman at all. Or my excitement for a sequel if and when that ever comes out.
Well,
who's to say at this point?
They did it right with The Penguin by not making it too connected to the Batman. It felt like its own thing that can work in conjunction with it, but it wasn't required viewing, right? It's not like with Marvel, where so many of their shows were actually dependent on where the movies were going, and they actually function as like long separate movies in conjunction with those, that they're actually like, they actually are part of that world. So if a show doesn't work, it could then affect your enjoyment of a following movie that's then connected to it. And I hope they don't go that route, because if they do, I think they're in trouble.
I agree. And if you are going to go that route, don't dilute it. My issue with Marvel comparatively to something like the Batman, because characters from that show are supposedly going to be in the sequel.
Yeah.
So there is perhaps going to be some missing context if you don't watch The Penguin, but I don't think on the whole, to your point, it's going to really matter all that much. Because a good sequel can take the elements of those shows and add to it to be like, or like to make its own thing, but then take elements from the TV show for fans that did see it and kind of create these cool moments that don't really impact the larger film all that much.
Right.
Which is how I foresee the Batman sequel going.
Yeah, same.
Marvel, on the other hand, obviously they're building an entire continuity franchise. So a lot of what they were doing on the TV side was going to be important for the movies to some degree or another. Now, if you did that one or two times, I think that's one thing. Because at that time, especially when WandaVision and Loki came out, the MCU was coming off a pretty significant high at that point. Fans of that franchise would have gone to see those series.
Yeah.
And that's fine. If you want to do one or two of them, great. But that's not what they've done. They're creating series after series. You can't even keep up with them all. You can't name them all. You don't even, there's probably some out there that you don't even know exist. They're just doing too much on that side of it. And especially if they start to connect to the movies. Like, I was seeing some people talk about, okay, well, what is the next Avengers team going to look like for the movies? And we're talking about the Avengers movies, right? These are some of the biggest blockbusters, especially on the comic book side, of the last 15 years. So you're going to have another Avengers movie coming out. It's going to be a big deal. and one of them was talking about the Incredible Hulk. Okay, what's Hulk up to? You know what the Incredible Hulk is up to? He is on a planet with his son that he didn't know existed.
Yeah.
Who is going to know that unless you watched to the end of She-Hulk?
Yeah.
Not even just the first few episodes. You have to watch to the end of She-Hulk to figure out that information.
Yeah.
And it's like, even of the MCU fans, how many people know that? Like, I don't think not many. I'm going to say the percentage is small.
This is a long Marvel tangent once again to say, Amazon, don't do this with James Bond, please.
And that's ultimately the comparison here, right? Like,
Yeah.
Yes, if you want to do it like the Penguin, that's forgivable. That's fine, especially if the side series is good. And maybe where you could do something serviceable there is with the Bond villain, because most of the time in the movies, they're there as a mechanism for James Bond to escape these scenarios. And they're not often fully realized characters.
Yeah.
So maybe you devote a series to them, much like the Penguin. I guess that is the quintessential example there, right?
Yeah, as long as there's still something very cinematic about the Bond films, or if they make films and there's something very cinematic about them, they come out every few years, so they feel like these kind of niche events. And that's at least what I'm hoping for being preserved. I don't necessarily care about what tonal direction they go with or who they even cast. I just like the schedule of how Bond has functioned over the past few decades, and I want to see that maintained.
And I think on the film side, that could still be possible.
I hope so.
No, I don't. I do think they're going to lose some of that spontaneity, because once Amazon really gets the ball rolling here, it's going to become part of the Amazon machine, and I think there's going to be less spontaneity there. But if they get the right filmmakers involved and the right cast, they could probably replicate it enough that it still feels James Bond. I just hope that they don't oversaturate it on the TV side of things like Marvel's done.
Yeah. Is there anything with James Bond you're hoping to see, as far as maybe, like, it doesn't have to be specific. We don't have to talk about who we want to see as the next James Bond or anything like that. There are many other people having those same conversations, and I think it's way too early to even have those conversations. But is there maybe like a tonal direction you're hoping that they go in, or like maybe like what can they do to differentiate themselves after, you know, the aura that the Craig era has created, and like where they can go next from here?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because I think it's going to come down to how much Bezos is willing to lean into the current socio-political climate. I think it's fair to say that his view of the world is very myopic, because he's one of, if not the richest person in the world. And his politics are going to align with the current administration's politics. And they're leading a path right now for more vulgarity than what we've seen over the last 40, 50 years, as far as this progressive transition to being more respectable and diverse and all those things. If Bezos wants to be more Elon Musk in terms of his brazenness, publicly speaking, then I think there's a world where we get back to the more Sean Connery side of things and leaning into the crassness of what that character was. And let's be honest, I love Sean Connery as that version of James Bond. Not politically correct at all by today's standards, or at least pre-2025 standards.
You know, interestingly, most of the films he was in, I could still, I don't want to say defend, but at least ignore some of those
No,
that lack of political correctness. But then there are some films like Thunderball where I think, man, that's just wrong. Now we're pushing
Yeah,
now we're
yes.
crossing the line a little bit, Bond.
Look, they're a product of its time, and that's
Mhm.
fine. I think that's why I'm willing to forgive them as well. And Sean
Mhm.
Connery is so good as that character. He's so charming and fun and
I must
lovable.
be dreaming.
Yeah, like it's incredible. It's an impeccable depiction of the character, and I love the goofiness of those
Yeah.
films.
I saw an article, sorry to cut you off, but it's sort of in relation to what you're talking about. I saw an article that ranked like the top 10 quotes from the James Bond franchise, and number 1 was not even Bond James Bond or Shaken Not Stirred. Number 1 was I'm pussy galore.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. Like I don't know, and perhaps this is part of why the Daniel Craig movies went in the direction they did, partially to differentiate itself from the
Mhm.
rest of the franchise on the whole. Like, we're going to take this in a more grounded, serious manner.
Mhm.
That's fine. I can understand why they did that simply from that perspective. But I also think it gives way to be more with the times. And you
Mhm.
couple that with, let's say, the Dark Knight movies and how that set a tone as well. Casino Royale comes out a year after Batman Begins, and that franchise really started to set a tone as far as this is what comic book movies can look like. This is how they can feel.
This is what
And
franchises
Casino,
can feel like, and like
yes,
this is, well, at least it was a recognition that audiences were ready to embrace that tonal change, because
100%.
in many
Yeah.
ways the Craig era is kind of a remake or a redo of sorts of the Timothy Dalton era. It's
Yeah.
just maybe at that time people were not ready to embrace that type of Bond, right? But I
Mhm.
think the Craig era just came out at the right time when people were more willing to take on a new
Mhm.
direction that was a bit grittier, a bit more raw and
Mhm.
vulnerable, and just goes to show how the mid 2000s were.
Exactly. Absolutely. And completely embraced by audiences.
Mhm.
Adjusted for inflation, Casino Royale makes almost $1 billion,
Mhm.
which is incredibly impressive.
Very
So
good movie.
yeah, Casino Royale, fantastic movie. Certainly one of the very best Bond movies, no doubt about it.
Mhm.
So that coupled with the Dark Knight movies, like there was certainly this progression of change, and it was a very exciting time. And I think the Daniel Craig movies, well, a little bumpy for sure. I think on the whole, a great little run there for Daniel Craig. And now on this side of it, it's gonna be interesting because again, like, is Bezos, and I bring this up because I think there is a possibility where this happens, where Bezos opens the door to say, let's be super crass.
Mhm.
Let's be forget being politically correct. Let's be super crude with our dialogue. Let's go back to the 1960s, which clearly one side of the political spectrum, that's what they want to do anyway.
Mhm.
Even pre 1960s. Like do they open those doors? And I think there's a possibility where that happens. Now, there's also the possibility of, and I'm not against this either.
Mhm.
Again, I love the Sean Connery films. In a
Sure.
way, I do. To answer your question, this is a long path to get to the
It's
answer to
okay.
your
It's
question.
okay. There's a lot to talk about here.
Yeah, I think I would love to see the tone of the Sean Connery movies again. I think that would be really fun, especially if you get the right actor in the role who can bring that same level of charm and
Yeah.
land those one-liners. Now, you don't have to be as crude as the Connery
Well,
films. You could be
it's
more 2025 with it, but still be fun and silly and goofy.
well,
And I
yeah.
think that would be like, especially if this is acting as some sort of reboot of the franchise,
Mhm.
to begin with the Sean Connery tone again. Yeah, I think that would work. I would be down
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful with how we phrase how we want this. I also want to say that I don't necessarily need political correctness in the ongoing Bond franchise, but it has to be the right type of crassness and crudeness that kind of fits the mold of where they're going without it feeling too dated. Because the idea of them going back to the Connery era, I don't want it to be a literal translation of what worked before. I still want to feel like there's something new happening here. But I will agree with you as far as where they can go next tonally. I kind of want to see something a little goofier, honestly. I mean, you mentioned maybe something comparable to the Connery era. I'd be okay with something comparable to the Roger Moore era. Like, I don't mind maybe going the route of a more kind of cartoonish Bond if it's the right talent involved, the right actor, the right people behind the camera that can spearhead this. Because I think it needs to differentiate itself in a way that feels like its own separate entity. I will say I do hope that if and when we get to that point where a new actor is announced as James Bond, I want my reaction to be much like it probably would have been with every other actor who's played the role. I want my reaction to be, I've never heard of this person before. Because I love how each actor who has portrayed Bond, it has been kind of a form of an introduction to them in the world of Hollywood. And I say that to say, like, there are so many great actors nowadays that could take up the mantle that people are theorizing around, saying that they would love to see them, but every one of them are too well known for me. I hope that they can at least stick to that consistency and cast someone that's a fresh face. Maybe someone we've seen a little bit of, but someone where we really start to scratch our heads around, I have no idea how this actor is going to make this work. I am curious about this. And I hope they keep to that kind of formula.
I admire your optimism.
Oh, I'm not saying I'm optimistic. I'm just saying I hope they do that.
Okay. Fair enough. That's not going to happen.
I'm not saying I'm predicting that. I'm saying I hope they do that.
Yeah, no. Totally fair. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing that either. I am not at all expecting that, though.
Tom Holland is coming in to play James Bond.
And to be clear on what I mean as far as being politically correct, because I don't need these films to be clean and let's round
sanitized
off
or anything like that.
Yeah, I don't need it to be sanitized. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is there is a difference between creating levity and humor that works for the character, especially in context of the character, that's not mean-spirited or toxic either.
Yeah.
I think of, again, I hate to get political here, but this is top of mind, and these are the references that come to mind, especially given who Bezos is.
Yeah.
But like a lot of the Elon Musk humor, for example, or you think about Trump's grab him by the, do you know what? It's that kind of crass humor that it feels childish that wouldn't work in a Bond movie. That's what I'm talking about. But if Bezos opens the doors, I see a world where they get in writers that pander to that style because guess who's in charge? Yeah. And Bezos is buddies with all those guys. So I just see a world where that happens, and that would not work for the Bond franchise. That's what I mean more explicitly. That makes top
sense.
Of mind when I
agree.
When I mentioned that earlier. But yes, if you get in smart, clever writers who can be crude in the right ways for the characters, then yes, I'm all for the Sean Connery tone, and I would love to go back there. If I'm a betting man, I think what we're really going to see, I think it's going to be one of two things. It's either going to be, no, we're actually just going to continue the trend of the Daniel Craig tone, because those movies made a lot of money. Skyfall made $1.5 billion by today's money.
That was huge.
Even then, it made 1.1. So, I mean, those films were moneymakers.
They were
big time,
and most of them were really good.
And most of them were good. So, like, I could see a world where Amazon just continues that, or I think if they go a different route tonally, it's going to be the Pierce Brosnan films. It's going to be GoldenEye. That's what they're going to do, is remake GoldenEye.
Which, I mean, again, like, I don't mind that tonal era of them embracing. That would be an interesting idea. I just hope they're better films than the Brosnan era. That's such a shame. I love Pierce Brosnan as James Bond. I think he just got saddled with mediocre films.
I agree.
which is really, really unfortunate. I kind of want to rewatch those again because when our good friends Jay and Ryan were here on Extra Film doing their James Bond series some years ago, and they got to the Brosnan era, we were keeping up with them, and I remember giving GoldenEye a rewatch and thinking, man, this is actually not good. And maybe I wonder if my taste will change given this new news in this context and how much I'm actually looking forward to maybe a tonal comparison to that. Maybe I'll end up liking it more again. I don't know. But yeah, we'll see. I definitely want to rewatch these movies, and I hope that whatever Amazon does, it's for the betterment of the franchise and not for the betterment of content creation. But it's most likely going to be the latter.
It's 1000% going to be content creation,
Mm-hmm.
which is why, we can sit here and try to have a fun debate as far as what this is going to look like.
And expect that Amazon is
reality-
listening, and maybe they'll actually take our opinions with a real serious edge and actually listen to us. But I doubt that.
No, I am wholly cynical when it comes to this. And I hate to be. I'm sorry. I don't want to make this conversation dour. Obviously, we want to be engaging with the conversation for the listeners.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see this going well at all in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
I am leaving the door open to be surprised. I would love to be surprised. And maybe if they get in the right people behind the camera, in front of the camera, perhaps that'll be the case. And to your point earlier, we've seen a little bit of that with other Amazon films and shows.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's certainly possible that they do surprise me, but I don't think the James Bond as we know it to be is ever going to exist again. And that is saddening to me, but that's the world we live in now.
Yeah.
Everything's driven corporately, and Amazon has the most of corporate dollars. And they're going to
monopolize this franchise for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So like if you're a fan of the franchise, I think we should prepare ourselves for the worst. And I am. Again, hate to sound cynical, but that's
I think a lot of people seem cynical about this. Even people who aren't tied to the world of film Twitter like we are. I mean, after this news was announced, even my dad texted me saying, "Did you hear about this news? Amazon's going to ruin it." He even said the same thing. It's like, okay,
that's right.
Yeah. Good, yeah. Love you, Dad.
Oh, Brendan, it's been one of them days.
It has been
one of them days. Yeah. We are here to talk to you about the new comedy that came out in January, one of them days. Sadly, we haven't had a chance to see this yet, but it is available now on digital, so hopefully we do get a chance to see it. I am really looking forward to it, to be honest.
I heard great things. Yeah, love the cast, love the energy that it seems to be conveying.
Yeah, absolutely. It stars Kiki Palmer and SZA and Cat Williams, Lil Rel Howery, my boy.
The greatest supporting actor of all time.
The greatest supporting actor of all time. Absolutely. Very much looking forward to this one.
Yeah.
And we have 5 digital codes to give away. 5 digital codes.
All right.
Most of the time, I do not participate myself. I might have to enter this contest.
Yeah, that would be a conflict of interest, wouldn't it?
Might be. My name was chosen. How crazy.
Oh, it is one of them days, isn't it? One of them days where we get in trouble.
Exactly. Yeah, so maybe that won't happen. But we do have 5 digital codes to give away.
Absolutely.
I do look forward to seeing this film, so I am quite buzzed as well. And if you want to win one of these codes, as always, hit us up on social media, Instagram, Twitter, @InSessionFilm. We will put out a post with a way for you to participate, and then we just randomly select winners. Oh, my name was chosen randomly. How crazy.
Maybe I should be the one to be picking names, because maybe I might randomly pick your name by accident. It's the only way I can think about you getting around this potential conflict of interest.
Yeah, no, I won't do that. All joking aside, we do pick them randomly, and I will DM you. So make sure that you follow us, because that's how you'll get your codes. Is I will DM you your codes if you are chosen. So again, one of them days. Really looking forward to this comedy. It's out on digital. Go check it out. We think one of them days for there. support. All right, Brennan, let's talk about In Session Film swag.
Let's talk
T-shirts,
about gear.
gear.
Let's talk about gear, mug, iPhone cases, ties, all of the above. But let's specifically talk about shirts because we have some awards-related shirts that I'm sure are going to pique someone's interest when it comes to the awards season here.
Yep, we do. We have Chasing the Gold gear.
Yeah,
so
we
if
do.
you want to check out any of our Chasing the Gold T-shirts and apparel, we have that available. We also have. I wish that I was wearing it. I should have foreseen.
I know you didn't do your homework, JD.
I know I didn't. But we do have Stop Turning Art into Sports design. If you want to engage with the show and the award season in that way. Yeah. Because I think we should stop turning art into sports. But it is what it is. But yeah, we do have some fun award season theme shirts up there for you to go and check out. Just go to insessionfilm.com/store or go to TeePublic directly. That's where we do host a lot of our apparel. Yeah. And you can just go to insessionfilm.com/stores/insessionfilm. And we got a lot of fun stuff up there. And of course, at TeePublic, a lot of those designs come in other things besides T-shirts. But, T-shirts, hoodies, that's always a big thing, especially during the wintertime.
Absolutely. Hoodie, yeah, agreed.
Which is why I love to wear mine. So you go check all that out. Again, insessionfilm.com/store or insessionfilm.com/stores/insessionfilm. We have all kinds of designs up there. If there's a design that you want us to create, we can certainly do that for you as well.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's a great way to support the show and looking cool while doing it, or looking uncool if you get the Lester Bangs quote T-shirt. That's one of my favorites to wear.
I think that's
as well.
Ironically, it's cool because it says uncool on it.
Exactly. No matter how you support us, we really do appreciate it. But for those that go out and get the swag, we especially appreciate you. And if you do go out and get a T-shirt, please post a photo on Instagram or something. We would love to see it.
Yeah, we'll share that. Yeah.
Thank you to everyone for your support. All right. With all of that said, let's go ahead and transition to something that I know is going to be really, really fun.
No cynicism for this conversation here.
Yeah. Our Best Picture movie series. We are continuing that. As we noted up at the top of the show, we are beginning the 1960s. Over the next 10 weeks, we are going to be covering The Apartment, West Side Story, Lawrence of Arabia. My God, that's a hell of a triple bill. Tom Jones, My Fair Lady, The Sound of Music, A Man for All Seasons, In the Heat of the Night, Oliver, and Midnight Cowboy. All right.
This will be interesting.
This is going to be fun.
Yeah.
This is going to be real fun.
I think unlike the 40s, JD, I don't know if this is the same case for you, but the majority of these winners I have seen before. So this will be nice refreshes in many ways. There's only a handful here that I haven't seen before, such as A Man for All Seasons, Oliver I haven't seen before. I actually have never seen In the Heat of the Night before, which will be a really interesting first-time watch for me. But the rest of these I've seen. The rest of these I've seen at least once. So, yeah, this is going to be a fun one.
This is going to be a fun one. I am very much looking forward to it. I can already tell as we noted at the beginning of the show, it's going to be very different from the 1940s, which I very much did enjoy. But yeah, the 1960s, a very different flavor of movies here. Before we get into The Apartment real quick, I think this was a rewatch for both of us, correct?
It was, yeah. I've seen this. Okay. I think rewatching it in preparation for this review we're about to have, this may have been like my 10th time seeing this movie. I've seen this movie a lot.
I have seen it a few times as well. However, I did not catch up with The Apartment until maybe COVID. It might have been 2020 during the COVID bubble.
Okay, interesting.
Where I caught up with The Apartment, yeah. So I am relatively fresh on it. Okay. But I have seen it several times in the years between COVID and now.
Yeah, which just goes to show how rewatchable the film is.
Yes. And unlike some of these other years, the other four films it was up against, The Alamo, Elmer Gantry, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, Sons and Lovers, The Sundowners, I haven't seen those films at all. And except there's one exception.
Mhm.
I was trying to find time to watch a few others leading to this because I knew this was on the horizon.
Yeah.
I did see The Alamo a few weeks ago. That is a bad movie. That is not good, like at all. And
I wonder how much of a trend that's going to be, because with regard to the 1950s and 60s, I wouldn't be surprised if many of these that did go on to win Best Picture were probably among the right ones, we'll simply say.
yeah, yeah.
I haven't seen any of these movies nominated alongside The Apartment. But when we get to, let's say, West Side Story and Lawrence of Arabia, and maybe even My Fair Lady, for instance,
Mhm.
a lot of the movies they were nominated against, I have seen, which will make those conversations
Yes.
pretty interesting
Yeah.
as to whether we feel like the movie that did win was the right one. And I think
Yes.
that'll be
Yeah,
interesting to
exactly.
talk about.
Yeah, once we get to some of these other years, I will have much more context to this. 1960 is one of those where I've seen The Apartment, and that's it. As far as the nominees go for Best Picture, that is anyway.
Sure.
But yeah, The Alamo, not great. That was the Amelia Perez of its time, we shall say. Oh boy.
Okay, well, now I know to skip it.
Yes. But The Apartment, let's get into that one. Obviously, it wins for Best Picture in 1960. It was also nominated for Best Director, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, Best Actress. What else? Best Screenplay, Art Direction for Black and White Films, Cinematography for Black and White Films, Best Film Editing, and Best Sound. And it won 5 Oscars.
Yeah,
including
it
Best
won.
Picture,
It
obviously.
won Best Picture. It won Best Director, Best Screenplay, and Art Direction and Film Editing.
So it had a really great night at the Oscars. Really, really great night. And if
Yeah.
the Alamo is indicative of its competition, can totally see why. But again, I haven't seen the other films. I don't know.
Yeah.
All right. So with that said, The Apartment. Are you ready to get into this? Is there any other context you want to lay out here before we get going here?
I don't think so. We could at least. I'm sure we're going to talk about Billy Wilder as a filmmaker, because
Yeah,
he
I'm
is
sure.
arguably
Yeah.
one of the most influential and notorious filmmakers of all time. You look at the films that he has made; he's got at least like 10 to 11 classics under his belt. The man is one of the greats for a reason.
He is one of the greats. Absolutely. He's legendary filmmaker for sure.
Yeah.
All right. With that said, let's go ahead and jump into this. The Apartment, of course, is directed by Billy Wilder, written by Wilder alongside I.A.L. Diamond. It stars Jack Lemmon, Shirley MacLaine, Fred McCurry, Ray Walston, Eddie Adams, and the list goes on and on. All right, Brendan. I guess I should note the synopsis here, although I think we all know.
I think
we all know this
everyone
movie, but
listening
just
has
in
probably
case.
been aware of this movie for some time.
A Manhattan insurance clerk tries to rise in his company by letting its executives use his apartment for these extracurricular activities, we shall say. But office politics and his own romantic hopes complicate matters. All right, let's get into this, Brendan. What did you think about The Apartment?
There's a lot about this movie that I feel like sets itself apart from some of the other greats of its time. I think this is a great movie. I think it might be Billy Wilder's masterpiece. For me, it's either between this or maybe Double Indemnity. Those are the 2 films of his that I think I like the most. I haven't seen all of his films, but from those I have seen, those are the 2 that stick out for me personally. But The
Those
Apartment
2.
is,
Wow.
The Apartment is probably his most rewatchable. And there are 2 things about it that I really thought about as I was rewatching it for this conversation we're about to have. One of them just being, it might be one of the greatest premises to a movie ever. I just think the premise itself is so clever that it was enough to maybe justify its best writing win at the Oscars. It's a really cool idea, and thankfully the movie itself takes advantage of that cool idea, so it's not just a superficial cool idea without anything to back it up. I think it has a lot to say about the transition of corporate America and the dark underbelly of it, right? That makes the film feel very timely nowadays, for sure. The other quality about the film that I really latched onto for this rewatch, it certainly goes hand in hand with some of these other nominations the film received back in 1961. Also, winning for best art direction, for best film editing. It was also nominated for cinematography. Billy Wilder also winning for best direction, because this is a film that's, for lack of a better term, rather domesticated, I guess. Most of it takes place in indoors in maybe 3 different locations: a giant office building, an apartment, the titular apartment, and maybe a bar. Like, that's really all it is. Very, very much of it is taking place indoors, not really all that exterior. And yet the film has a real epic feel to it. It kind of feels huge. It really takes advantage of the New York City grandness to almost make it feel like a character in its own right. And I love movies that do that. And it's so interesting to see a movie that mostly takes place indoors and almost has this like stagey quality. You can easily see this on a stage, and I think it could actually work as a stage play if you were to adapt it in that way. But it has a real epic feel to it that I guess always knew was there, but I just found myself thinking about that more in the context of, I guess, my film critic mind nowadays. And I was really taken aback by Bill Wilder's direction. I think it's a really well-made film. Like I said, it's one of my favorites of his, but I think it might be his best directed film of all of his directorial efforts. It just has such a precision and such a tonal balancing act going on too, that we'll certainly talk about as well. I do quite love this one.
Yep, I am with you. I absolutely love this film. It is an all-timer for a reason, and not just for Best Picture winners, but generally speaking, this is one of the best movies ever made. Wilder's screenplay is extraordinary. It is truly, truly transcendent, partially because it almost feels like a movie that was made for today. We are 65 years removed from its release, but its depiction of toxic masculinity and power dynamics, with how it exhibits the behavior of these men, is sadly very reflective of 2025, given our current sociopolitical climate. There will probably always be a timeless quality to this film regarding its commentary, but in the context of 2025, it hits even harder. That aside, though, Wilder's writing here as a movie is a masterclass. The dialogue is crackling. There is a poetry to it. There's a sophistication to how each character is written with exquisite purpose. They all have their own unique personalities. Of course, the performances are crucial to that as well. There's great attention to detail with its tension and drama, and balancing that with its humor. It's an astonishing screenplay. But Wilder, the director, to your point, Brennan, is equally vital here, because this is a film that should not work. It shouldn't.
It's a fair point.
In the hands of a lot of other filmmakers, this would have been a complete and total disaster, because the back half of this film does get quite dire with its stakes. For a film that is sizzling with great humor and playful commentary, things take a drastic turn at one point, and if not for Wilder's sharp control of this film tonally, it would have fallen apart. As great as the screenplay is here, this is equally as much a masterclass in tone management. I don't know how he does it, but the film is somehow able to be extremely entertaining and maintaining its witty levity as its drama becomes deeply poignant. Not enough can be said about the marriage of Wilder's writing and direction here. It is really incredible. And to that point, Brendan, perhaps that's why this is his directorial achievement. This cast is really excellent. I'm sure we'll talk more about these performances as this conversation goes, but I have to shout out one performance here. I felt on this watch especially, I've always loved the performance, but Shirley MacLaine on this rewatch for me hit quite deeply for me. And I think it's
I agree.
because we are off the heels some months ago where on the In Session Film Awards, I talked about Connie Kuzruti
Yeah.
in All We Imagine Is Light. And I talked about in that review that we did for that film and on the award show, how I fell in love with that character. I just wanted to give her a hug and tell her that everything was going to be okay. I had that conversation, that feeling that I had of Connie Kuzruti with McClane in this film as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you just fall in love with her. You want to wrap your arms around her and let her know that it's going to be okay. Like, your heart just completely breaks for her. It's such a stunning performance. And I know this is hyperbole. I just watched this the other night. So maybe take this with a grain of salt. And this might change the next time we bring up a Wilder film. I don't know. I think it might be my favorite performance in a Billy Wilder film.
I would not push back on that. Maybe the only other performance I might cite that could still be in that conversation is maybe Ray Milland from The Lost Weekend.
Yeah.
I'm looking at his filmography here. Maybe Gloria Swanson from Sunset Boulevard is another one I might think about as well. But I certainly wouldn't push back on the notion that Shirley MacLaine gives the best performance in a Billy Wilder film. I could potentially agree with that. I wouldn't be surprised if Connie Kuzruti would cite her as an influence, given her performance in All We Imagine Is Light, because I actually think there are some silent comparisons that could be made between both performances. You're right; she's a very huggable character, and I love her here so much.
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of lines here where I nearly fell out of my seat. When she responds to Bud at one point, and he denotes that her mirror is broken on the little mirror that she carries around. And she says to him, "I like that it's broken. It makes me look the way that I feel."
That is a line. That is a line right there.
That is killer. That is like, you just fall out of your chair like, oh my God. Like, your heart just burst into a million pieces, especially like the line itself. Again, going back to the writing is extraordinary. But the way she delivers that line takes it to a new stratosphere. It is an absolutely just devastating line delivery.
Yeah, well, this is why we have to once again praise Billy Wilder, the director, and his tone management here. Because a line like that in any other filmmaker's hands that maybe doesn't have that type of precision or that type of skill would probably overemphasize the drama of that line to the point that it maybe felt a little saccharine, a little too much, right? And Billy Wilder doesn't quite do that. I think that's why the shift at the midpoint here works so well, because in many ways, this is a movie that is a tale of two halves. We often talk about that concept, movies that function like a tale of two halves. It might even be a fun, separate conversation we can have on this show at some point about the best movies that feel like they are tales of two halves, because there's this clear midpoint shift where the movie takes a turn and becomes something else entirely. But Billy Wilder doesn't overemphasize either the biting satire of the first half and the heavy drama of the second half. He keeps things pretty centralized in a way. He doesn't amp it up too much, which I think allows that transition to feel as smooth as it does. So even though there is an obvious shift, it never feels that obvious. The film, in a weird way, feels like it's still building to some type of big, crucial emotional turning point that when it comes, you're not prepared for what's about to happen, but you're prepared for some type of shoe to drop. And I think that's what's so great about Billy Wilder, the director here. He does some weird, tricky things that kind of foreshadows something is about to happen pretty soon. And it does. He absolutely handles that very well without overemphasizing either side of that, of that agenda, I guess. So it's really well balanced in that regard.
I completely agree. Like I said in my opening thoughts, his tonal control of this film should be studied and has been study.
There's
to
a.
be fair.
I mean,
People have
the first time I saw this movie was in a film class, so it just goes to show.
Film classes love breaking down this film, and for good reason. And it is incredible, the conviction of this film in terms of its themes, but so much of the film is playful and diverting in its approach to examining those ideas here. And it brings life to these characters for sure, and injects the film with an incredible vigor.
Yeah.
And then it takes this remarkable turn with Fran that, to your point, the film does set up quite well in terms of how she is a victim of this system that has been created at the workplace, and how she's been caught up in it. Certainly some of it is her own doings, right? The choices that she makes in it all.
She
But
acknowledges
that's
that she
something
always finds bad men. Yeah, she talks about
she
that.
acknowledges it. Absolutely. She takes responsibility of it. And that is such a big part of not just her identity, but her overwhelming sense of insecurity. There's another striking line, and I think it's another moment when she's talking with Bud where she simply looks into the mirror and he's trying to tell her how he feels, and she just says, I don't like myself. I don't like myself.
What did
And
she say around that time
again,
too? Why do people have to love people or something like that? It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, you can
Yeah.
quote her lines and just write them down, and you've got it's what a
it's-
screenplay here.
And the writing, again, it is really, really quite poignant, but the way Shirley MacLaine delivers those lines and how she taps into that deep insecurity and those vulnerabilities in Fran, and why she's feeling so down, it is phenomenal acting. It's really, really terrific, and it gives credence to the choice that Fran ultimately makes. And that whole sequence when Bud realizes what's at play. And again, you talk about a moment of tone management. I was talking earlier in terms of the broad tone management of this film.
Sure.
That sequence in and of itself is incredible because Bud, who has another woman over that he had picked up at a bar reluctantly, has her over, realizes, and obviously we're in full spoilers here, I guess.
Oh yeah, talking about a 65-year-old movie. I think we're
Exactly.
okay to get into this.
Yeah. Realizes that Fran is there on the bed, has OD'd on the sleeping pills, and he has to get this woman to leave. And the movie, the way that Bud is trying to get her out of the apartment, it is still somewhat comical. There's still kind of this diverting quality to him trying to get her out of the apartment frantically and with urgency.
I love how he comes to in a way like he's clearly not sober in the moment, and yet this huge rude awakening sobers him up, which is probably what would happen in real life. And the film emphasizes that too. But you're right, there is still something kind of I don't want to say goofy, but there's still a comedic energy to the way some of these.
There is like a comedic edge to it for sure. And then once he and so then he's able to kick her out. He goes, of course, and runs over to his neighbor, Dr. Dreyfus, to come over to help with the search situation. And he's in the room with Fran. So like as he leaves, or as the woman leaves, and the film is kind of shifting between dire urgency and comedic, please get out of the apartment. Then it shifts totally to the stakes of the moment. And I gotta say, Jack Crucian's his nomination, I think, was for this moment alone.
Oh, it's an inspired nomination. I really think it's one of the most inspired nominations in a movie that I've ever seen as far as an acting performance is concerned.
Like it's like, I hate to kind of phrase it this way because it makes it sound less serious than what the moment really calls for, but it's kind of how you feel, at least how I felt anyway. Because as Dr. Dreyfus is, getting her to vomit, trying to get her to be awake, giving her the coffee, we got to get her up. and get her walking. And in Crucian's performance, there's such an emphasis in the urgency in his performance that it almost feels superhero like. Like it's like
applaudable.
I felt like the way you feel about Cap saying Avengers Assemble, that's how I felt about this guy getting Fran to wake up and we gotta walk. And it is a literal heroic moment in a film that you did not see that coming. Like you don't necessarily expect that given the levity and the diverting qualities of the film. And man, it just incredible. Like I wanted to stand up and applaud and cheer and put my fist in the air. Like it's that, like he evokes that despite that sounding like I'm not trying to conflate superhero movies with this film, but
I mean, this is a real superhero right here.
Yeah, but it does kind of rouse a similar sensation, if that makes sense.
It's kind of like maybe this decade's version of from the 1940s. I'm going to break that marriage up from the best years of our lives.
Okay, I have a comment about that later as well.
Okay.
We're going to circle back to that.
We're going to circle back to that. Okay, sounds great. But let's keep talking about Jack Crucian for a little bit because I agree with everything that you're saying, and I do think it's a very inspired nomination. In any other year, I feel like if we were to get a movie like this and it were to receive a Best Actor nomination, a Best Actress nomination, and a Best Supporting Actor nomination, most likely that supporting actor nomination would have gone to maybe Fred McMurray, who is, Sheldrake, the villain of sorts here, right? And I think he's great here. Don't get me wrong. If he were to be nominated as well, I wouldn't push back on that. But I feel like those three would have been the most stereotypical nominations for a movie like this in years past. And when I say years past, I mean pre-1960s. But this is maybe something we might notice with the 1960s, and maybe why we chose to go with the 1960s for this series next, is that it feels like this is when maybe the Academy was turning a new leaf and changing a little bit in the way that they honored certain films that were maybe a bit more bold and daring. And I think this is a great reflection of that. Jack Crucian is a very inspired nomination because when he takes over in that scene, he kind of becomes the star of the movie for a moment.
He does.
I was very surprised at how, and I've always known this about the movie, but I was very surprised at how much this film really relishes in the medical procedural elements of that scene. This is going to be a weird comparison because they're not the same, but I think the overall agenda is kind of the same. It kind of reminded me of what Spielberg did in a movie like E.T., where he cast real life doctors to try to resuscitate E.T. in that moment. So there's actually some weird grounded realism to it, and it really relishes in that for what feels like a long period of time. The same thing kind of happens here.
Can I speak to that for a moment specifically? I think what's really fantastic. So like when she's laying there on the bed and he has to give her an injection, you see him, even though the camera is sort of emphasizing Bud in the moment and his panic, you do see Dreyfuss go through the procedural element, to your point, of getting out the needle, putting in the medicine, and going through the whole thing, even putting the needle up to her skin as he's about to inject it for real. And then the camera pans because they weren't actually going to inject the needle into her arm. But at the last second, the very last second, it pans over to Bud, who is full on panicking in the moment, which I thought was a fascinating little trick to get around that. But everything up to that
give
moment
it a visceral quality to it that it still maintains.
Yeah.
It seems as though Billy Wilder and Jack Crucian, whoever was involved in this particular scene, they clearly did their medical research. I assume that they did. They had to have consulted. It does feel that way, and I don't know how true that might be, but just based on pure speculation, I think it's safe to assume that they did their research to get that scene as accurate as possible. And that's why I made the comparison to something like E.T., because it did feel very natural and real. And this does feel that way. And it's a long sequence. It goes on for what is essential. I think it's like 20 minutes. Like the whole resuscitation
it's
process
of
Miss Kubelik takes a long time. It's kind of its own mini short film in a way.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really, really is. Again, quite dire, tonally very different from the rest of the movie, but works. It somehow very much works. And what's interesting about it in terms of the medical procedure of it all that you're talking about, it's also reflective of the time. I think doctors today might look back at that and go, man, that is not at all what you're supposed to do.
We get it, yeah.
For 1960, it probably was how they
Yeah.
would have responded to that
Yeah,
situation. And I love the conviction. That's the word that comes to mind for me with Dr. Dreyfus. The urgency, a passionate neighbor who is trying to help out Bud despite some of the verbal sparring they have throughout the film, because he's constantly giving Bud a hard time or telling him he needs to slow down because his life is spiraling out of control. Now, some of that is he doesn't fully grasp what is really happening in the apartment. However, he did somewhat foresee this happening.
Yeah.
And that circles back to what you said earlier in terms of the foreshadowing of the film that we get in the screenplay, as Dreyfus did say to Bud he needs to slow down or he's going to experience something tragic. And then he does. It's just not with Bud, it's with this young woman. And he just jumps into the fray. Like Dr. Dreyfus jumps in with full conviction to help Fran recover from ODing there. And it is an incredibly visceral moment. Like just one of those great performances that stand out. Like as much as I love Jack Lemmon and Shirley MacLaine, and they very much do shine in this film. They're both freaking fantastic. But man, Jack Christian, when he is there, when he's on camera, he's noticeable in a big, big way. He's noticeable. So I do love that nomination as well.
It's so a movie's absolutely working when this might be my favorite Jack Lemmon performance that I've seen, and yet it might be the third best performance in this movie.
Honestly. And that's probably how I would rank it. Like I probably would have him at third, and he's really great. He is very, very good. But yeah, I would definitely have McLean and Crucian over him here.
But I do at least want to acknowledge how great Jack Lemmon is here. We haven't really talked much about him yet, because in many ways the film's tonal shift that happens at the midpoint is because of how great his performance is. In many ways, the shift in his performance in particular is the most jarring thing about that tonal shift, but it's what makes that transition more noticeable and seamless in many ways. When he notices the broken mirror at the office party and is able to put two and two together, that the woman he is falling for is the one that he set up his boss with at his apartment. So like the realization there is kind of devastating. And I think Jack Lemmon sells that really well. His interest and attachment to Miss Kubelik is very charming. It really is. And I think a lot of that is also due to how great the cinematography and Bill Wilder's direction is here. There were a few instances from a cinematography standpoint that I really took notice of during this rewatch that I never really picked up on before. And this is why I called the film kind of epic in its own way. Probably my favorite shot of the movie is when Jack Lemmon is standing outside the theater where they're about to play The Music Man, and he's waiting for Miss Kubelik, who said that she would join him. And at one point, he's the last one standing there. There's no one else around. They've all gone inside to see this show. And this shot clearly emphasizes that it's raining out. But what does he choose to do? He doesn't stand underneath the marquee to keep dry. He's standing in the rain. Just a small gesture like that of how desperate he feels looking out for this person that he wants to spend time with. He is willing to stand as far out as he can just to hopefully catch a glimpse of where she is. And just for lack of a pun intended, I guess, just soaking in that, I think, is really quite great from a cinematography standpoint. I think his performance is also great, parallel to that as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's also a good transition to perhaps talking about the film thematically, because a lot of his performance drives this duality that we see in the character as it relates to the film's themes. And I do agree with you. I think what's fascinating is that while he's certainly a significant cog in the machine as far as the power dynamics go at his company, he's not explicitly involved or the same kind of person as the other men are. And
Yeah, he's
it
very
is
innocent by
indicative.
comparison.
He's very innocent, and it starts with that first moment between the two of them when, at least that we see. Obviously,
Yeah.
they've been working together for a long time, but the first moment that we see them together, Bud walks into Fran's elevator and he takes off his hat and they have an earnest, sincere, charming little conversation there, right?
Mhm.
And you juxtapose that to how others treat her in the film, and it is clear that Bud is different than
Yeah.
everyone else, but he is also a big part of what's happening there. So like it's fascinating to see that duality, and in Lemon's performance, how he has to wrestle with that dichotomy, I think is
Yeah.
incredible. And it certainly makes sense of scenes like the one that you're talking about where he is desperate to find, you know, romance in a different way than his superiors are, for sure.
Yeah.
Especially as it relates to Fran. And the irony of why she isn't there is again part of the brilliance of the writing and the
Sure.
screenplay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know how that moment also kind of colludes with, you know, another scene where he's stuck outside and he has to sleep outside in the cold. And
Mhm.
there's like a significant chunk of this film, like 20 minutes, where he has this cold and has to perform as if he has a cold. And
Yeah.
the way he moves, the way he sounds is very different than how he is throughout a lot of the film. And like that manic energy from the character doesn't really dissolve, but it does kind of dictate certain choices that the character makes. And
Yeah.
again, it adds to the levity and the comedy of the film, right? Like there's a visual gag here where he's like stuffing his nose with medicine throughout a lot of the film.
Oh
Like,
yeah, his comedic timing's great. But
Yeah.
he's just so likable. He's so likable
he's
here
very
from begin.
lovable. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's almost like I think the best word is innocent. Once again, I don't want to say
Mhm.
buffoonery or cartoonishness, even though maybe his comedic nature is certainly more heightened than anyone else in the movie. But it's interesting because Jack Lemmon was born in 1925, so he was maybe 35 when this movie came out. But he seems younger by comparison to the way the other men, and he is younger. You know, he is one of the younger members of this firm, and you know, as he promotes himself up through the ranks in a very tricky way, which is again a very clever way of saying how we actually have to progress upward in corporate America, not based on actual talent, but based on, you know, evilness in a way, right? Grossness, toxic masculinity, as you talked about. Yet he still seems awfully younger than he actually is. There's something so innocent and almost childlike about him, which is why I think, in a way, this almost kind of functions like this weird coming of age tale for him, just given the realization and the arc that he has to make when it comes to the film's climax, which I think is very striking.
I agree. I love the performance. I think it tethers to the themes of the film extremely, extremely well. And I do want to talk about that further because I love how this film sinks its teeth into that thematic undercurrent. Again, while being diverting and charming all the way throughout. There is obviously a grossness to how easily these men succumb to infidelity. But
Yeah.
what's really striking is how brazen they are about it. So a moment ago, we were
Yeah.
talking about the innocence of Bud here.
Yeah.
There's a scene where one of the managers, Al Kirkby, gets off the elevator, and what does he do? He
Yeah.
smacks Fran right in the rear,
Yep.
in front of everybody, out in the open. They also talk openly of pursuing other women in the office. They don't seem
Yeah.
to really care about the consequences at all. And these are all married guys. And what I love about Wilder's filmmaking is that he doesn't overplay his cards. He often lets the absurdity speak for itself. The way these managers casually ask for Bud's key as if it was just another office supply, I think underscores how deeply ingrained the corruption is at this firm. But the brilliance of the film is that it doesn't just satirically expose the abhorrent behavior of these men, but it forces Bud to confront a system that he was complicit in creating, a system that rewards power over principle, a system that exiled him from his own life. Instead of taking refuge in his warm apartment after work, he often has to wait outside in the cold or walk the streets.
Yeah.
Again, I love how playful Wilder is with that here. There is a lot of fun to be had with the film as it examines these ideas, but it does denote that, to your point, the game isn't about how good you are, but what you're willing to give up in order to grease the right palms and eventually climb the ladder. And if that's not the story of America, I don't know what is.
Well,
that
and
is
yeah.
100% what America is all
Well,
about.
and I think what makes this movie so ageless in many ways goes back to that tonal management that we keep referencing with Billy Wilder's direction, is that he obviously takes that notion very seriously, but he doesn't take it too seriously, which I really like, because there is this balance between kind of a comedic nature and how these men clearly take advantage of Bud just for their own gains, and they're so self-aware of that. There is kind of a silliness in the way that they behave, but it also still maintains that grossness. It does have it both ways and doesn't overemphasize one over the other to play its hand too obviously, even though it is very clear. But it takes a really good director and, of course, some really great actors to find that line where you're grossed out by what you're seeing, yet you still enjoy what you're seeing. Like, there's still something fun about it, and not fun in a way that supports that kind of decision or that kind of action, but it's an enjoyable watch because there is this levity to it simultaneously.
Yeah.
And I love that balance.
Which Scorsese is very good at, for example.
Oh, of course,
right?
yeah.
He's the master of it in many ways as well. But Billy Wilder was good at this as well. And what I love about the film is that, and it's challenging to articulate because you are talking about how this film doesn't take itself too seriously. And I do agree that the film is able to maintain its diverting quality while still engaging with these dire circumstances that come about with Frayne, as we noted earlier, and its thematic underbelly, as we're talking about here. And the thing about it is, I think Wilder gets to have his cake and eat it too, in the sense that I do think that the film takes its commentary seriously. It just doesn't deliver it in a serious tone.
That's the thing. That's the thing. There's conviction in what it wants to say. It clearly has its heart in the right place and is dedicated to saying the right thing, and it feels committed to that. But the delivery of it isn't overly serious.
Exactly. Exactly. And the two elements that really strike me in terms of the film and like sticking the landing, so to speak, one of them is the Fran stuff, as we talked about earlier, and what happens to her. However, I also think about the ending to this film, the third act, where that takes Bud here. Eventually, there is a line to be drawn in the sand for him once he realizes how deep the consequences truly are. And what I love about the ending of the film and the choices that Bud makes is that it's not just about giving up what he's gained with his complicity, but it's about reclaiming some sort of integrity in a world that otherwise treats it as expendable. And that, I think, also has conviction here. Again, the delivery system, even in those final scenes, there's still a playful quality to it at times. But I think as far as the thematic underbelly of the film goes, exposing these men for who they really are, I think the film does that in a really fantastic way. So, like, again, and we talked about this earlier with Lemon's performance and how he taps into this duality. He is complicit, and he has to confront that. Which he does. And I love that it gets to a point where he does draw a line in the sand. I don't want to be this person. I am not you. And I want to treat Fran with some sort of respectability and love. And when he realizes that he's not going to get that opportunity because of his boss and who he is, he makes a decision and just simply walks away from it all. And so, like, I do love that from a metaphorical perspective as well. I think is really great. And I think that's why so much of this film is timeless. So, like, it does have a backbone. This is a film with a deep, vigorous backbone, but it does deliver that commentary in just in such an engaging way that makes this film endlessly rewatchable.
I think what's so ironic about all that too is while we seem to agree on this, that the film is taking its themes very seriously, even if it's not presenting them in the most self-serious of ways, it also seems to be the thing that Billy Wilder is most interested in when we get to the ending of the movie, is that thematic conviction. Because the movie concludes in a way that this might sound like a backhanded compliment in a way, but I found the ending kind of anticlimactic, but I actually mean that as a compliment. It doesn't resolve. It doesn't resolve in a way that maybe a more traditional movie like this would, because first off, Wilder is more interested in that thematic idea than he is crystallizing the central romance here. I mean, aside from one minor gesture at the apartment when Fran's brother-in-law punches Bud in the face, she kisses him on the forehead. There's no other kiss in this movie. It doesn't end that way. It ends with a gesture of love, but it ends over a card game, not about the physicality of love. So it's not as interested in that kinship in the most literal of ways. So it actually makes the love between them more, I guess, thematic and a way to parallel those thematic notions we were talking about earlier. And on top of that, characters like Sheldrake, the villain here that we talked about, Fred McMurray, does he really learn anything by the end? Not really.
Not at all.
No.
He's a total sleazeball. Even as consequences come to his doorstep, and he is forced into a completely new life. And at one point, we even get a snapshot of his life at home. We don't ever see his wife, I don't think. But we do see his
she
two
comes
boys.
down the stairs. She does show up once. But interestingly about that, as much as we're not supposed to like this man, and we don't, I mean, he seems like a good dad.
He's having a great little moment with his two boys. But I think that is to emphasize the irony, right? That at home, maybe he is a loving father and a great husband. Who knows? But that is the snapshot that Billy Wilder wants to paint, because we know that who he really is away from home, he's the antithesis to that.
Yeah.
So I do love that little juxtaposition there.
Yeah. So in a way, what Wilder is doing is showcasing the importance of the individual as opposed to the problem at hand, that maybe this is something that is imminent and not solvable, right? He's not trying to solve this issue. It's more so, how can these two people learn to recognize this overarching corporate issue, but still exist within it for the betterment of themselves? And that's essentially what this is. It's a movie about civic liberties in many ways, and I kind of appreciate that.
Yeah. And to your point earlier, we get that snapshot of who Sheldrake is at home, but we know him to be the sleazeball away from home. And yet when all of that dissolves, he just doesn't care to relish in any sort of heartbreak. There's no consequences to him. It's like, I'm moving on. I'm moving on from my family and two sons to be with my mistress. Like, just like with a snap of a finger.
Yeah.
And again,
it's almost like he takes joy in that because he didn't have to make the action himself.
Which, again, I think speaks to that duality in the commentary that we're talking about. By making that decision, it, from a thematic standpoint, is like, wow, this is what he's saying about corporate America.
Sure.
And but on the same token, from just the simple movie perspective, it's such a fascinating choice as well. That just kind of maintains the levity of the movie, and it's really great. And of course, it emphasizes Fran's decision there at the end when she leaves him as well.
Yeah.
So again, like, I love how the film is able to have its cake and eat it too. And the other thing too about it that I think is really great too, is with what you're saying about the ending of this film. I do think that Wilder is being subversive to old Hollywood here on purpose.
Oh, absolutely.
And the reason I say that is, I think it is kind of funny how meta this film is regarding old Hollywood,
Mhm.
because so many films in old Hollywood prominently featured and often encouraged cheating and infidelity, which
Mhm.
makes sense when you learn about old Hollywood and the sleazy things that were happening back then. It was not great.
This
It wasn't
does
great.
seem, it does seem like a very Bill Wilder thing to do, because many of his films were kind of deconstructionistic in a way,
Yes.
about the tropes of Hollywood at the time, whether it be about film noirs with a movie like Sunset Boulevard, or or a movie like Some Like It Hot certainly has some of those same elements
Yeah.
about the difference between masculinity and femininity and the crossing of
Mhm.
those separate lines. And here, I think he's doing the same thing by deconstructing that very notion that you're talking about, but also deconstructing the idea that just because this is still a romance movie doesn't necessarily mean the couple, quote unquote, gets together in the traditional sense.
Mhm.
And I
Well,
think you can
and that's,
argue that too.
yeah, that's ultimately what I was trying to build toward, is that this is a film that wants to comment on those old tropes and how romances have been depicted again with
Hmm.
infidelity built right into the DNA of a lot of those romances, which is
Hmm.
what makes the "I'm gonna break up that marriage" thing we brought up earlier so funny. Like so funny. Like I easily thought about the best years of our lives here as well.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, the way this film ends, it is a commentary on Hollywood itself as much as it is America, and it doesn't want to engage romantically in the same ways a lot of those movies did.
Hmm.
And it is a bit anticlimactic. Perhaps you can infer that they do get together and maybe they get married. Who knows?
I don't
But I
know. Like,
love that it's kind of
yeah.
left up in the air a little bit.
If someone wants to make the argument that their relationship is strictly but platonic, I don't think that's a unfair assessment. I think there
Yeah.
is evidence to support that potential direction as well.
I agree. I agree. I mean, I think it's like the way Wilder ends this, it's probably fair to say that they at least give it a try,
Hmm.
but knowing those two characters and who they are and their histories, I don't think there's anything to suggest that that could last either. Like I
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
who's to say, but like, and I love the buildup of it though, because obviously Bud is head over heels for Fran, but it
Hmm.
takes up until the last second for Fran to kind of reciprocate that.
Hmm.
And so, which is why I love that it ends with them just playing cards. Again, there's a
Yeah,
poetry
it's a
to
simple
that, going back
gesture.
to the
Yeah.
writing. It's a great gesture, and it circles back to that endearing moment of them, kind of, playing cards right after
It's
she's,
yeah, yeah.
recovering from her issue.
Wilder recognizes that he's probably sitting there thinking that every other Hollywood movie would end with them kissing or maybe even having sex, or at least alluding to the fact that they're about to do that. Whereas here he's thinking like any normal person who went through this situation is not going to immediately embrace each other in that way.
Yeah,
Let's keep this grounded. Let's keep it
yeah,
real. And he
yeah.
absolutely does.
Like speaking of sex, though, one of my favorite lines of dialogue in the film is when she's still over at the apartment and
Hmm.
her sister's husband is on the way to find Bud, but he
Oh
doesn't know
yeah,
this. He
yeah.
doesn't know this. We as the audience are aware, but he doesn't know. And he's trying to get her to play the game again.
Hmm.
And he says something to the effect of, yeah, we could, you remember, we can play that game and I won't take advantage of you like the last time when we were in bed or something like that. And he's talking innocently about a card game, but he
I
says
know.
that
It's
as he
yeah.
opens the door, that's what the guy hears. It's just good. It's
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah. It's like he probably walks in. What is this perverted form of role play you guys are talking about?
Yeah, it's just the best. Like I love it. I mean, and that's, yeah, this film, entertainment wise, is quite good. It's very good.
It's all encompassing. I feel like in many ways it represents everything that Billy Wilder was so great at. That's why I think it might be his best film. Like I said in the opening of this conversation, I feel like it's either between this or Double Indemnity are the two that I tend to cite as my favorites. But I mean, he's got a lot of classics under his belt. I do like The Apartment more than Some Like It Hot. I like it more than Sunset Boulevard. Sabrina, I haven't seen in quite some time, but I know I like it more than that one. The Lost Weekend, I think, is also a very good film. I like this more
Which,
than that as
speaking
well.
of, did you catch the Lost Weekend reference in the film?
I don't think I did. You
Yeah,
might have to educate me on that one.
There's a line where, and I forget, it might have been the Al character. I think so. Yeah, because it's him and another one of the managers are in Bud's office.
Mm-hmm.
And they're speaking about what he saw because he saw Fran on the bed, so he thinks that Fran and Bud are kind of in cahoots or whatever.
Sure, yeah.
And he says something about like them having a tout at the apartment, and he's like, a tout. It was more like a lost weekend.
Oh, okay, yeah, you're right. It was so subtle. I didn't even pick up on that. It just felt like natural conversation.
Yeah,
I thought you were about to say that the bartender at one of the bars was played by the same bartender in the Lost Weekend, as if Billy Wilder was building his own cinematic universe or something.
But that was definitely the Leo pointing at the TV moment. I was like, I see what you did there.
Oh, okay, that's clever. That's clever.
Anyway,
that was a good movie.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
I do
but
like
thought
The
that
Lost
was
Weekend
funny.
quite a bit. Yeah, definitely one of the better Billy Wilder films that I have seen. But this, yeah, I think as we round out this conversation, it probably is my favorite Billy Wilder film. The Apartment is.
Yeah, I think so as well. I mean, as you noted, he has several masterpieces here, some all-time movies. I love Double Indemnity as well. That's probably my 1B here. Sunset
same.
Boulevard is another classic of his as well. One of his most underrated, I think, is Ace in the Hole. I think that film is a masterpiece.
That's probably my number 3, actually.
Yeah.
Like I want to do my top 3 Billy Wilder films up until this point.
I'm right there with you.
The Apartment, Double Indemnity, and Ace in the Hole. And I do, I recognize that movies like Some Like It Hot and Sunset Boulevard are classics for a reason. I don't fully love those films to warrant calling them one of my all-time favorites. I think they're all great, but I think they have some things in them that, respectively, I don't love. From a storytelling angle, I don't think they're perfect movies. But I think those other 3 that we referenced there are just more provocative and more realized productions. I think there's more going on there seamlessly.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Ace in the Hole, and again, I think it's just because it's another one of those movies that is like The Apartment in the sense that it's very entertaining. There is an entertaining angle to that film, but thematically, man, that's a hefty movie.
I agree.
And a film that very, very much holds up today as well. So I love Ace in the Hole. That's certainly a top 3 Wilder film for me as well. But yeah, I love Some Like It Hot. All-time classic movie for sure. Sunset Boulevard is great. The 7-Year Itch is another well-known of his.
It's a very entertaining one. Yeah.
Entertaining. So yeah, I mean, the man was very good at his job.
He was.
Very good.
Yeah. He did good
Very
things.
good at his job.
Did good things.
Did good things. But yes, I think The Apartment is my favorite of his. I think it is.
Yeah. And honestly, looking at these other films that we're going to be talking about in this series, all of which won Best Picture in the 1960s, we're off to a good start. I think we're off to a very good start.
We're off to a good start. Now, some of these films I haven't seen in a while, so it's hard to say fully where this will land for me when it's all said and done, when we get through all 10 of them. But given how I feel about all of these films in the moment, it's very possible that once we get through this decade, that The Apartment, if it's not my favorite of this crop, at worst it'll be number 2.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm not ready to say whether it's my favorite of these 10 films we're about to talk about. But I think it might be. Honestly, there are 2 films here that could give it a run for its money for me. And of course, we have to revisit them to see how we feel about them now in context of this movie series. But one of them is Lawrence of Arabia.
100%. Yep.
The other one is Midnight Cowboy. Those are the 2 that I'm thinking could potentially give it a run for its money. But I wouldn't be surprised by the end of this series, those end up being my top 3 of the Best Picture winners.
And Midnight Cowboy is the one that I'm looking forward to the most with that specific conversation in mind, because I do love it. At this point, I would probably slightly take The Apartment over it. Lawrence of Arabia, though, that's a different story altogether.
Yeah.
That one
Yeah.
could easily overtake The Apartment once we get through it, because I have really changed my tune. If you asked me that a couple of years ago, Lawrence of Arabia would have been low on my list here, but that's changed. And I think Lawrence of Arabia could easily take that number one spot when it's all said and done
Sure.
of this decade. But The Apartment is going to be in the conversation, and likely at worst will be number 2 for me. But we'll see once we get to Midnight Cowboy. I am very much looking forward to that rewatch. It's been quite a few years for me. So
Yeah, I do love that film.
any final thoughts as we wind down here?
Good movie. The Apartment. Good movie. Movies are good.
Yeah, movies are good. Really do love this film a lot. And I cannot wait to see where the rest of the series goes.
Absolutely.
If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, please leave a comment below if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel, all that fun stuff. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, Letterboxd. You can always email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com as well. But we would definitely love to hear from you.
Yeah.
As we wind down, just a reminder that we will have 2 reviews this week. We are going to be talking about the neon horror film, The Monkey, which we didn't do any sort of box office segment this week, but this was the second best opening for a neon film. And the only other film that beat it was Oz Perkins' our first film with them, Longlegs, that came out last year.
Gosh, Neon's going to hold on to that man for a long time.
Yeah.
Hey, okay. I haven't seen The Monkey yet. I'm weirdly looking forward to it because I think, as I've talked about, I'm not an Osgood Perkins fan. I haven't been won over by any of his films yet. But I think his style would work for more of a horror comedy like this one appears to be. And I will say, though, as GD and I tend to have the same brain on most things, if we align on The Monkey, it might be our shortest review ever.
Yeah, look, I don't know how else to say it. Look, I'm just going to leave this as a tease for now, and we'll talk about it more when we get to the review this week. If we were not reviewing it, I would have walked out of the theater.
And this is honestly why I'm so looking forward to it now. I need to see what you saw. I love the marketing of the movie. I love the marketing for it, so I'm hoping that we have something to disagree on, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Look, I will do my best to be fair and have a cordial conversation, regardless of where Brendan sits on it. I'm not just going to come in,
guns a-blazing. Yeah. Or monkeys a-drumming.
Monkeys a-drumming. Not going to do that, although I could. No, I'll come in. I'll try to have an articulate, as much as I can, anyway, fun, engaging conversation. But yeah, I'm not going to be nice necessarily, though, either.
Hey, if it rubbed you the wrong way in a certain way, then
criticisms.
The movie doesn't need you to be nice. You're not obligated to be nice if you hated your experience.
Exactly. So yeah, we're going to talk about The Monkey, and then the other film that we're going to cover is a documentary. Sly Lives, is that the name of it? I'm trying to recall.
Sly Lives. Yeah, there's a long title that goes along with it. It is called Sly Lives, aka The Burden of Black Genius, which is the new film from Questlove, his follow-up to Summer of Soul. This movie depicting the famous funk rock soul band Sly and the Family Stone.
Okay, yeah, and I did not walk out of that one. Did not. So there's your teaser for that one.
Questlove, good at his job.
Yes. So we'll talk about those 2 movies. Be on the lookout for that. As I noted earlier, Chasing the Gold, they will have their Oscar predictions this week. Stay tuned for that. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
There'll be a New Women in Session as well. Enjoy the Oscars, everybody. Have fun. Have a good time. I am going to be completely and utterly wasted, which is why we are not recording the night of the Oscars. We will do that the next night when I am probably very hungover. So
it's going to be a fun show. Yeah, I guess I'll have to lead that one because I won't be drinking.
Yeah, so it's going to be fun. Cannot wait. With all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Billy Wilder.
The Apartment.
So
good.
good.
Great start to
Love
the
that, man.
series.